To you, my heart cries out perfidia, for I find you, the love of my life, in somebody else's arms. You know what? This is Ellroy reads, it's not Ellroy sings, so I'll put this away. And if you have any requests for me to sing any other songs, put them in the comment thread. I won't hold my breath. Yes, welcome to Ellroy Reads. Welcome back. This is the vodcast where I look at books which are extremely influential in the life of James Ellroy. Books that have inspired him to write, that have given him ideas, that added to the wonder, you might say, the wonder of this life, literature that moves us, that makes us think, damn, I wish I'd written that. I wish I'd written something so good, and makes us go out and create. Not even something as good, or, perhaps something even better. Yes, there are books that do that, and we've covered several really good ones so far. We've covered The Fan Club, Mrs. Payne's Garage, Compulsion, and this week we are going back to Ellroy basics because we are covering a Black Dahlia novel. In fact, it is the first best-selling Black Dahlia novel. True Confessions by John Gregory Dunne was published in 1977. It was inspired by the Black Dahlia murder, the murder of Elizabeth Short, and it was a huge bestseller, and it was a huge influence on James Ellroy, on his career, on his writing plans. It just impacted him emotionally to a great extent. And 10 years later, Ellroy published his own novel titled simply The Black Dahlia, and that was a huge bestseller, and that was a massive boost for him. It put him on the literary map. It was his first bestseller. He wasn't producing bestsellers before that. And of course, he was always in danger of being dropped, as a lot of early career authors are. So The Black Dahlia really saved James Ellroy's literary career. It made him. It's been a lifelong obsession for him, but True Confessions isn't where it all started in terms of James's obsession with the Black Dahlia, but it's certainly the first Dahlia bestseller. It's not so well remembered today. It's certainly not as well remembered as James Ellroy's own novel, The Black Dahlia, and I'll be talking a little bit about that. So let's go into some of the background. Well, John Gregory Dunne, if you do not know, was an author. He was an essayist, a screenwriter, an extremely gifted author, and of course he was married to Joan Didion, one of the greatest authors of all time, one of the greatest American authors. And despite being immensely talented, one might say if you're married to Joan Didion, you're always going to be slightly in her shadow. That's just the way it is. True Confessions was his first novel, and it was a huge success. It's a heck of a first novel to start with. It's set in the 1940s, and it concerns two brothers, Tom and Desmond Spalacy. Tom is a homicide detective, and Desmond is a Monsignor for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. They're two Catholic brothers. And this is a novel very much about Irish American life, the Catholic Church, the huge influence on politics and culture that the Irish American immigration has had to the United States. And as Dunne says in the introduction, this is a rather fanciful, anachronistic portrayal of Los Angeles, because 1940s Los Angeles wasn't that ethnically Irish. It was more of a Protestant city in and of itself, and more of a Latin city. So what Dunne has done, what he did was to transpose Hartford, Connecticut, and where he was from, and in many ways Boston, the Irish American culture of the East Coast, and transpose it and put it onto Los Angeles in his fictional portrayal, because he wanted to write the Great Noir novel, and he wanted to write a novel about the Black Dahlia murder. Now, the Black Dahlia in this novel is called Louis Fessenda, and the nickname she's given is actually cooked up by Tom's partner, Frank Crotty, an extremely corrupt, venal, and ultimately very likable man, as are a lot of characters in this novel. She is called the Virgin Tramp. The press wants something catchy to um, to sell to the readership, to sell to the public, to make it a a publicity friendly homicide, if you like. Tom Spalacy doesn't want it to be a big homicide at all. He wants it to be a nice small homicide that goes away after a few days. There's great cynicism in this novel. In many ways, it feels like Tom is inconvenienced by the murder. I mean, to begin with, he doesn't particularly care. He doesn't like the way it becomes this, monster of public opinion, and it's striking fear at the heart of the city, and his superiors are using it as a chance to get promotion. He doesn't like how political the murder becomes because, well, he's rather callous about it. He's got enough problems at home. His wife is in an asylum of her own choosing. His daughter has become a nun. He has a girlfriend, who was a kidnapped victim of a man he actually ended up sending to the chair in San Quentin. And that man was called Turd Turner. He got the nickname Turd after defecating on a man who was trying to rape him in prison. So you can probably sense the black humor here, the cynicism, the 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 great kind of Irish personality and character of the book. Because in spite of all this darkness, there's actually a lot very likable here. Um, Tom becomes good friends with Turd. I'm not sure how often I can say Turd on this video without just cracking up. But he becomes good friends with, let's call him Turner, Turd Turner. He visits him in prison, and one of the things he does is an act of kindness because Corinne, the woman who Tom stole from Turd, you might say, the lady in question, obviously wanted nothing to do with Turd, and Tom tells Turd that she's a lesbian, just purely to soothe his feelings, and he maintains this lie, and Turd Turner's so dumb he believes it. So, there's a lot of kind of grotesqueness in this novel, and it is kind of like so absurd and so kind of like unsettlingly dark that it kind of gets under your skin, and as gripping as it is and as page turning as it is, all of the cynicism, even though there are times where it's quite likable and there's the usual kind of hard-bitten, hard-boiled noir and terse language, you do feel like you need a kind of breath of fresh air from it after a while. The murder, like I say, is something of an inconvenience to Tom, and the solving of it is rather arbitrary. In fact, Tom's partner Frank Crotty, the very corrupt man I mentioned earlier, who's shaking down a local Chinese restaurant because there's kind of illegal card games going on down there. But he goes down there. He lets the card games happen, or for free food and for a piece of the action and all that. And Frank Crotty actually throws up on the corpse when they find it. And you think, well, there's slapdash, and then there's corrupt, and obviously crime scenes are now looked after, one hopes, much better than they were in the 1940s when the press would walk all over them, for instance, and trample all over them, which is what the press did when they found Elizabeth Short. But throwing up on a corpse, I mean, that's pretty beyond the pale. The details of the murder, in terms of the physical details, the torture that was inflicted on Elizabeth Short, which is obviously shocking, and I won't repeat at length here, but if you're a James Ellroy fan, you probably know that she was sawn in half. She was found bisected into pieces. There are other elements added as well. For instance, she's found with a votive candle inserted into a vagina posthumously, and that detail was added by John Gregory Dunne just to tie the story to the Catholic Church and the themes that he wanted to explore. And it's quite clever how all the events tie to the Catholic Church, because if I talk a little bit about Desmond Spalacy now, I think it's slightly the more interesting of the two brothers. He is an up-and-coming Monsignor. He's working for the Cardinal, who is dying. and the cardinal has already picked him to be his replacement. He's going to be a bishop. But the archdiocese has got itself potentially into a lot of trouble because it's been doing business with the local gangland kingpin, a man named Jack Amsterdam. And Amsterdam is nominally in construction, and the Catholic Church has been giving him all of the construction contracts to build their convents, their churches, their schools, their hospitals. Amsterdam's been building all of that, and of course he's been skimming off the top, and it's been giving him cover for him to pose as a good law-abiding citizen, which is the last thing he is. So Tom gets it in his head that he wants to bring Jack Amsterdam down. Tom was actually once a bagman for Amsterdam. The shades here of Dave Klein, isn't there, in white jazz. Tom was once a bagman, and he feels bad about that to the extent that he's got a conscience. But he wants to see Amsterdam in prison. Tom was very lucky to escape an indictment himself on that particular case for his work with Amsterdam. In fact, he has a friendship with a local madam named Brenda, who is very closely modelled on Brenda Allen, the famous Hollywood madam of the time, the Heidi Fleiss of her time, who was very, very in tight with the LAPD in the 1940s. And Desmond starts to feel his conscience being pricked because he's ambitious, he wants to be bishop, he's done many, many cynical things. You know, he's seen other priests come and go, he's essentially kind of ruined lives and ruined other people's careers for his own advancement. The cardinal's got great faith in him, he sees him as the future of the church. But he begins to be sickened by his own cynicism, and he thinks that the church has to cut Amsterdam loose, and he knows that that's going to be very, very dangerous, not just physically, because this man is a murderer, but also reputationally, that a lot of mud can, come out of this, and it all does. It all comes out, and practically every character goes down in this novel one way or another. They die stupidly and grotesquely. Fred Fuqua, who is Tom Speller's superior, finally becomes LAPD chief and then chokes on a piece of steak at a dinner, at his inauguration dinner. And it's very blackly comic, very bizarre. The joke about a man dying in bed with a younger woman twice happens. Heart attack during sex. So yeah, the book certainly has this kind of grubby feeler with it. It's like, it's not just that everything's grotesque, it's like the world is laughing back at you. It's almost like this is definitely a fallen world. And it's not as if you can escape this corruption. It's the church is more corrupt than anything else. It's not as if you can really live, no matter what convent you run to, no matter what church you run to. All of this sin and this kind of grubbiness all catches up on you. And in terms of influencing Ellroy, it did and it didn't, if that makes any sense. There's direct influences I'll go into, but also the indirect influences, what Ellroy chose to ignore, are almost just as important. First of all, it was published in 1977, and that was a year Ellroy had got sober. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous. He was reading voraciously. His own writing ambitions were beginning to take shape. They were getting serious now. He dreamed of being a writer, but when you're an addict and you're homeless, that sort of dream is unlikely to become a reality. And he'd been obsessed with the Black Dahlia case since he was 11 years old, and he first read about it in Jack Webb's The Badge. And he had fantasies where he could rescue Elizabeth Short. He'd had dreams where he could catch a killer. He felt like he was in love with Elizabeth Short, but he also felt like she was a kindred spirit because she spent a lot of time dossing around LA, drifting from flat to flat with no real sense of purpose and no almost like this kind of vagrancy lifestyle that he'd had. He didn't judge her for that, as many people did at the time, and even decades later when they've looked into the case. He never looked down on her. He very much felt this kinship with her. So he has writing ambitions, and then True Confessions comes out, and it's just this massive bestseller. And he thought maybe The Black Dahlia would be his first novel. And then he realized how big this novel was and how unlikely it was that he'd write a similar Black Dahlia novel, and it could be a success. The market would be too saturated, and of course, John Gregory Dunne already had a reputation by this stage, and he had none. So he writes Brown's Requiem, his first novel. It gets published, which is an achievement in itself. It's very difficult to get published. It was difficult then, it's even more difficult now. And he builds his reputation through 5 more subsequent novels before finally he tackles the Black Dahlia novel. And again, it's his first bestseller. But really, Ellroy did a lot more research. He probably did more research on the Black Dahlia novel than he did on anything else. He was going to New York Public Library because he was living on the East Coast by this stage, and he was getting on interlibrary loan the newspaper coverage. The newspaper coverage was just massive. There were many newspapers in Los Angeles, all very competitive with each other, all going out of their way to publish very lurid details for the time, because there were some things that they couldn't publish. The police held back from them. Some things that were too graphic, at least for the readership at the time. But he was putting together the case day by day and putting it into his own novel with Bucky Bleichhardt as his protagonist. It's interesting that Bucky Bleichhardt is German-American, which is what Ellroy thought he was for the longest time. Just as True Confessions is a novel about Irish-American life, Ellroy makes Bucky German-American. Of course, it wasn't until he was writing and researching My Dark Places that Ellroy found out he's not German-American, he's British-American. And ever since then, he's been a devout Anglophile. You only have to tell someone they have a certain drop of heritage, and then suddenly they become absolutely fascinated by that and try to embody that as best they can. I know I do, so I'm not diminishing that in any way. But anyway, there is one other interesting link between True Confessions and a later Ellroy novel. In fact, it might be the more direct influence, in that True Confessions begins with a section titled Now, and it's set in the present day, and Tom is visiting his brother, who is living in a desert parish, in the middle of nowhere, dirt poor. And Des tells Tom, "I'm dying." They're old men at this stage. He says, "I'm dying. My heart is giving out." And then the next section is titled Then, and it jumps back to the 1940s, and we have the entire case, the Virgin Tramp case, laid out, and all of the events that lead up to this way. So we already know that 1940s Des, the ambitious, the thrusting, the comer, the coming man, Desmond Spalacy, it's not going to work out for him. We know that. We don't quite know how it's going to happen, and how it all unravels is very, very interesting, and it cuts back to now at the very end, and all of it is laid out for us. We understand now why Des is living in this desert parish, why it didn't work out for him, but at the same time he feels more Christian because of that. He feels that Tom was his salvation, which is unusual, that this sexually promiscuous and a moral man could be the salvation of a priest, the nominally more moral man. And Ellroy used the same thing in Blood's a Rover. He used these now-then section headings as it jumped between time frames. And I was speaking to Ellroy a lot during the writing of Blood's a Rover. That's when we first kind of became close, and then didn't see him for a few years, and then we became close again when I wrote his biography for Bloomsbury, Love Me, Fierce and Danger, The Life of James Ellroy, nominated for an Edgar Award for Best Biography, also nominated for the H.R.F. Keating Award for Best Biography. So go check out Love Me, Fierce and Danger. Anyway, when Ellroy and I first started speaking, he was writing Blood's a Rover, and one of the first things he said to me is that I'm using this now-then headings that I took directly from True Confessions, and I wonder if anyone will comment on it. I think it's brilliant. It's a wonderful use of how the past influences the present, and in many ways we're hostages to the past. These characters certainly are. So, True Confession's a little bit forgotten today. You may be familiar with the film which came out a few years later, starring Robert De Niro as Desmond Spellecy and Robert Duvall as Tom. That was directed by Eula Grossbard, and it's quite good. It's a fairly faithful adaptation. It's got a great supporting cast and Charles Durning, and it's reasonably good, but it doesn't quite just knock you out the way the novel does. I just feel like a lot of the themes here of Catholicism and guilt and corruption just play a little better on the page than they do on film. John Gregory Dunne never wrote a book as good as this again. He never wrote a bestseller like this again. He spent a lot of time in Hollywood, wrote a memoir about his time in Hollywood, and he was probably just as cynical as Ellroy was about the whole experience. That's another thing that they had in common as screenwriters. Ellroy himself never managed to even read another John Gregory Dunne novel again. His next novel came out in 1982, Dutch Shear Jr., and Ellroy was looking forward to it, but then just couldn't get into it and gave up on it. But that's life. That's the life of an artist. Sometimes you're a victim of your own success. And with True Confessions, John Gregory Dunne truly inspired Ellroy and gave him something great to work from. Ellroy already knew about the Black Dahlia murder, but he hadn't read about it in such thrilling fictional terms. He didn't know yet what could be done with this story of the murder of Elizabeth Short in fictional terms until he read True Confessions. So if you're a Black Dahlia obsessive, which most true crime fans are, and if you're a James Ellroy fan and you haven't yet read True Confessions, just go out, read it. Read it before you watch the film because it's better. And I think you'll find that it really holds up. It's just a classic novel in its own right. It deserved to be a bestseller. It doesn't deserve to be forgotten. And here at Ellroy Reads, this is the sort of thing we do for you. I bring back novels that inspired Ellroy. They may have been bestsellers, but they may have been forgotten because they become problematic or sometimes just, when authors die, it's very, very difficult for their name, for their estate to be relevant still. You need multiple, I think, film and TV adaptations at least to stay relevant posthumously. But do read True Confessions, and it is a marvelous novel, and I will have another recommendation for you on Ellroy Reads next week. So until next time, goodbye. I'll see you then.